Hello, everybody. Welcome back for the people who were already there for the sessions of yesterday, and welcome for the people who are here for the first time to hear about the Symposium of High-Rise Living and the Inclusive City. The session today is the second general session on the presentation of the project. Yesterday it was more about what we wanted to do at the beginning, and today it's about methodologies, questions, and some of the findings we have found during the duration of the project, which began in 2017. So it's a 3-year project, even if it was indeed shut core because of the pandemics. So there will be 4 different presentations. I will begin with some sort of general presentation. Then Manuel Appert will delve more specifically on the case of London. Then Manuel Alves and Camila Moreno will give more details on the methodologies and the questions and some findings on the case of São Paulo. And Manuel Alves will then go back to have a broader presentation. So, and then indeed, we would like to have your comments or your questions. You can do that there is a comment section in the comment section of StreamYard. So now I'm trying to share my screen, and so to begin, so I will share screen. Okay, this is it, and I will charge it. So here it is, High-Rise methodology, questions and findings. And so the first thing that we had to deal with when we began this Franco-Brazilian project with a researcher from the Brazilian side, from the USP in San Carlos, and other also in São Paulo, and also researchers from the French side in Lyon, because it's a Franco-Brazilian project. Well, it was to go towards a common vocabulary and methodology. The first problem was also the language, because we had to choose a common language since on the French side we didn't speak Brazilian, and on the Brazilian side they didn't speak French, so we had to use English. And as a colleague of mine said some years ago, when you are speaking a language which is not your own language, your IQ is lowering. And so I'm sorry if what I'm saying is not always entirely understandable. But so we had to go towards a common vocabulary and methodology, and even to translate words that we knew very well in our own language into English, which also adds another problem. We didn't see that. And also, the second reason was because we are not from the same academic background. On the Brazilian side, people are mostly from architectural background. There are also geographers and sociologists, but mostly from the architectural background. And in France, we were mostly from geography plus sociology and anthropology. So we needed to be sure that when we say something, even like urban processes or architecture, urban forms, lifestyles, we were speaking the same word. So that was the first problem, which will never be entirely resolved indeed. But well, we are working on it, and we are working on it inside the project, and we are working on it also when we want to publish outside the project, because here we have to ground our work into already written reflections on concepts. Well, and also one of the way also we tried to overcome that was to try on the other side the methods implemented on one side even if no global methodology was put into place, it was impossible because sources are not the same, people who are just involved in the project are not the same. But when you are working on same methods or on same objects, you have to agree. And we'll speak later about the website that we created, but there is a toolbox, for instance, in that website in which, well, we put some definitions about words that are very useful, like what is a high rise, and also topics, something which is not finished yet, but we agreed on a certain number of topics which were common on both sides, and these topics are the ones in which we will give some sort of common definitions, and or also the differences which might exist both sides of the Atlantic. But well, at the beginning of the project, we said that we would do some theoretical workshop just to deal also better with that, but they have not been held. Because lack of time, because of pandemics and so on, which leaves us with some sort of open mind on the terms like inclusiveness, urban equity, and urban justice. And so I'm really eager and waiting for the conferences which will be held, I think, 2 days and next week on such topics, because outside help is also very interesting for us. One of the big methodological choices we had to do is case studies. Which case were we going to study just to tackle what we wanted to say? Well, this was mostly linked to the way the project has been granted and to the people taking part in it. But we had to have Lyon as a major case study on the French side, and we had to have São Paulo on the Brazilian side, which was quite interesting because on the one side you have a city which has a long history of residential high rises, and it's not very so common around the world. So it was really a very interesting city, and it was in the what is called the global south, and on the contrary, Lyon is a smaller city with very few hundreds of high-rise residential high-rise buildings, and it's in the global north. So even this, we already had two very different things. And then we added London, and Manuel Appert is going to speak more about that, because London had already been studied, and London is in the global north, but is a global metropolis with also some history of residential high-rises and very specific ones. So that was also quite an interesting case. And then with other researchers, we wanted to go to another city in the north, which is Melbourne, in the Anglo-Saxon British in between word, which would be interesting. We also added Brasov in Romania, which is in the communist world, so with another story concerning residential high rises. So we preferred to have several case studies linked to the people who wanted to study them, indeed, or were able to study them because they knew them, and also the United States, and I will talk about that. What was very important in the creation of the methodology was access to data. Which data would we be able to access? Either it's a crucial part of every research, indeed, and it's not always easy when you look at the long story of HDA, IDH from both sides that was talked about yesterday, because the definitions are not the same in France and in Brazil, which surprised us. Or remote sensing, Julio Pedrassoli talked about that yesterday. In some places it's very useful, in some other places it's not useful. Data can be accessed or not. But we were nevertheless able to create a spatial temporal assessment of residential high rises at different scales in Europe, in UK, in France, in São Paulo, and in Lyon, using different databases like Emporis, mostly for Europe, or Embrace, and others for São Paulo. So the case studies, which are the heart of our research, have been chosen not to enable a comparison, but to enable to create some sort of methodology which can be used entirely or partly in other cities, not only for one city. But as I already told yesterday, we wanted our research not to be an entirely and only academic one. So we wanted to include the urban agencies in there, so that our work would have some sort of practical result, which is to better the planning processes and the inclusiveness of the cities, to include the vertical dimension in planning documents, to foster a more inclusive city. But the first question was that the contexts were very different, the regulations were very different. In Lyon, there were general regulation, mostly based on safety, and residential high-rise, it were not inside regulation per se. They were just one example of high-rises, which were mostly office high-rises, and it's not the same way, indeed, to plan an office high-rise and a residential high-rise. But it's still not really taken into consideration in Lyon and mostly in France, except for height. And mostly based on safety. But in Sao Paulo, we have seen yesterday, for instance, with Manuel and Milena's case study, that they are very specific and they are changing quite a lot since about the 2010s in the midst of identification policies. And so we first had to deal with very different contexts, which gave us a lot to learn and to work on, or not. But to include the urban agencies first, they had to have the time to do that. And it was not very simple. In Lyon, we knew that, and it was almost the same case in Sao Paulo. And the second problem was the political agenda, which led to a complex history of stop and go in Sao Paulo. Is that further where they said, oh yes, before the project was granted, they said, well, yes, we are on board. And they said, oh no, after elections. They said, we don't know. So they procrastinated, and we had to wait and wait and wait. And then one day, about 1.5 years ago, it was a big yes. So we prepared a lot of things. And instead of having a magnificent symposium in Sao Paulo with people in the flesh, we had to cancel everything. So everything went out in the air. So the collaboration is real, but it's still in its first stages. We were not able to hold, for instance, the 2 scheduled workshops with the agencies because of that very chaotic story. However, a meeting between both agencies is to be scheduled after the symposium. So it also shows both things, that political agenda can go just in between a research project and its aims, and a pandemic also can go in between. And when you add both, well, you have that some sort of very strange story of our relationship with urban agencies, which are now back good. I will now give you an example of an unfinished case study, Living High in the United States, because it shows all what we achieved and what we still have to achieve, because it's a project which is not finished. Indeed, it will never be finished. But what we wanted to do is to put the first stones to build a magnificent research for others also. So. And why the United States? Well, it's because I'm a specialist of urban America, but it's the land of individual housing, the American dream, but also the land where ultra-luxurious high-rises linked to global finance are being built, especially in Manhattan. They are very well known. So it's the discrepancy between a country in which you are supposed to live horizontally, except in very few central metropolises, and the advent of some sort of new form, which is the luxurious high-rise. And it's also a country where municipalities have less powers than in other countries. So it would be interesting just to check how municipalities are dealing with the advent of that in face of the wish of developers, for instance, or of citizens associations which are against or for. Then we had to choose case studies, and so I wanted to have once a southern Republican state with no long high-rise living experience and weak municipalities, So in which developers would be the dominant force, like Dallas, so I went to Dallas, and then a northern progressive state with stronger municipalities and also public policies. And so this was the case of Minneapolis. So they were two very different cases, and I wanted a third one, which might be in between, which was Charlotte, a fast-growing new South metropolitan area, which is densifying and also thinking of densifying through residential high-rises. But field work had to be cancelled due to the pandemic, so I never went there, and I think I will never go there. So the case studies will remain unfinished, and so the conclusions will also remain unfinished. So I still have some results, like there are specific products, residential high-rises have become a specific real estate product linked to financialization, but at a local national scale and not an international scale in these metropolises. It's not New York, it's not London, and based on luxurious lifestyles with the accent and centrality and multiple amenities of the building. So they are trying to portray in the narratives the apartments in high-rise buildings, like as if they had as many amenities as a private home. You have a pool, you have this and that, you have gardens, but they are communal gardens, and you do not have to tend them, you just have to pay fees so that someone is just taking care of it. But you still have something you have in your individual home in the high-rise, while being very close to the heart of the cities. And there are a lot of legal statuses, condominium, apartment, condominium, you own it, apartment, a company owns it and rents it out to you. Hotel condos, so you own your flat, but you have the amenities of the hotel, which is in the same complex. And social housing on the public side, with a lot of financial problems, and not a lot of them in the United States. So it's mostly the condo apartment which exists. So it was also interesting to look at the legal status of these apartments, because they tell things about the way people are engaging or not with high-rise living. And so there are also two ways of creating them: construction, well, of new ones, or conversion of former office buildings beginning 20th century, because they are quite beautiful and well sought after, or even 1960s, 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s one, which are converted because offices are going elsewhere, or it's not fit anymore for Class R offices. So that also is a way of looking at the transformation of the central part of American cities. So the result is that it's really linked to gentrification, indeed, but the municipalities have different views of that gentrification processes. It's a welcome process in Dallas. They want to gentrify people because the population was only 200 people in the central part in 2000. So they were able to attract new people who are paying taxes, 10,000 in 2070s. But it's a process to be controlled in Minneapolis. So in other municipalities, they say, yes, but we don't want flats to be transformed into Airbnbs. We don't want only gentrification, and so on. And it remains a micro market, a niche to the rich, because population involved are in the tens of thousands in municipalities which have millions of inhabitants. So it's not something very big. And also, it's very difficult to integrate these new buildings into the streets. And the concept of active podium was only introduced in 2018 in Dallas, for instance, which is very common in other countries. In São Paulo, you know that since a long time, for instance. And so it is part of densification policies of central cities, and it's also a learning process for most people in the United States. It's not something which is very well known, and people have to adapt. That's why they prefer, in Dallas, for instance, apartments, because they rent it. And so if they don't like it, they can just give up the rent and go elsewhere instead of buying it. And lenders are not lending money to companies in such cities, to companies who are building condos, like in Toronto, in Canada, for instance. But well, at the end, I have as many pending questions as I have resolved ones. There is no convergence at all in case studies In Minneapolis, most high-rise living is in social housing, well, which has a lot of problems, money problems, financial problems. So there are no global processes at all in the United States. So you have to multiply the case studies just to go to have a broader picture and to see if something, some trends, general trends are going on. Because New York is well known, and it's another case, absolutely another case, with transnational capital, non-living, non-resident owners, and so on and so on. So this is one of the examples of the work we began, and we didn't go at the end. But at the end, do we have a definition of what is living high? Because this question soon arose, how to be sure that what we found was linked to living high? What is differentiating vertical living from horizontal living? Because we find things when we interview people, indeed, they say this and that, but we are not sure that they wouldn't say similar things if they lived in an individual home in a suburb, for instance. So the preliminary answers is, well, first is that high-rise living is a construction. It's not a given, absolutely not. So we have to study the relationality between built form and inhabitants which have tactics and strategies to adapt to that new built form. Sometimes they knew before, and sometimes they are new too. The role of the context is therefore fundamental. In the US, as in France, you have to learn or to relearn to live high. Relearn for people who, for instance, might have lived into social housing, high-rise housing, and now because they have more money, they are living in other high-rise living. So they have to readapt, to relearn how to live there, because it's not the same thing. And the role of imaginaries of high-rise living and the necessary adjustment to it is really very important in these cities, and that's why it's important to look at the narratives. When in São Paulo, high-rise living is closer to normal, at least for middle-class people, although, yes, upper middle-class people. And the major components of living high are, well, these are only 2 or 3 of the components we stressed, and you will see that today and the day after in the symposium. The view is something absolutely major, which is also a social construction and a spatial capital. If you heard what Manuel said about Louise Dorignon's work yesterday, you have that. And then when Geoffrey Mollet will speak, you will see other examples. The elevator is one of the crucial points, which is not only a technical device. Indeed, it's far more. And when Enora will speak, we will know that it's a word in itself inside the... And it's one of the points which defines high-rise living. More broadly, the role of technique and objects. The elevators, indeed, I have already talked about, and the management of the building also, for instance, which is different in a high-rise building than in an individual home, indeed, or in very small low-rise buildings. So we are beginning just to have that definition. It's not a closed definition. I just put some things here, some reflections. And also, did we succeed in reaching a de-Westernized gaze? Because we wanted to have a de-Westernized gaze. Well, at first, it is a difficult task because all the notion concepts are linked to the Western way of thinking. And even the fact that we are speaking in English now, when we are using the vocabulary of social science in English, because it's the one we are accustomed to and the one we have to use. Which is, I think the research might have been different if we had been able just to understand each other in Brazilian on the one side, because you have your own literature, and in Spanish and Brazilian, and also in French on our side, because we also have a specific literature. But well, so we had to deal with that, and we did not want to get rid of them, but we chose not to take them for granted. So if we use a concept, we said, well, what does it mean? Does it mean the general definition, or do we have to adapt it and, with some hybridization process? So it's a constant go-between case studies and theories that was used, and that's why case studies are so important. Our motto might have been keep an open mind, yes. And the fact that we chose case studies, not or far less studies by leading Western social scientists, and therefore not theorized as such, was a point in our favor. We do not have a Sao Paulo model of city. Well, we have a South American one. There exists indeed. We do not have a Leonese model of city, of urban processes. So that also was quite interesting because we had to go to the field just to know what was happening. And this enabled to pinpoint local processes in financialization, for instance, and you will hear where Juana and Cesar will talk. They will show that there's very specificities of what happened in Sao Paulo, which is absolutely not the same as in London or as in New York or Tokyo or elsewhere. To see the cases in the light of the others, what happened to social housing in Europe by comparing Lyon and Brasov, and this will be talked about by Bianca and Olivia, to uncover cases not yet studied, middle-class central high-rise housing in Lyon, which we didn't know existed, suburban high-rises in Melbourne, because they were out of the radar of overarching Western theories. And so, do we have answers to our hypothesis? If you listened to me yesterday, I talked about the hypothesis, so I'm quickly going back to them and to say yes or no. I will just say yes or no, and then you will have to listen to all the people in the symposium today or on YouTube later, just to have the real answers. So residential high-rises beyond housing solutions are becoming a commodity in an increasingly financialized real estate market on a level for municipalities to achieve the compact city models. Yes, the global answer is yes, but with a lot of variations according to the cases, answering our first hypothesis, which was residential high-rise building processes reveal different types of local global negotiations in the making of the neoliberal city. This is absolutely true. So you have to look at each case to see how this adjustment have been made. Second, imaginaries and representations of the residential high-rises are ambiguous, and past representations are influencing current representations and planning strategies, like the stigmatization of modernist high-rise housing project. Yes, you have to look at Geoffrey Lewis and so on. It's absolutely true. Then, contemporary high-rises, by means of a sophisticated design and selective urban planning, promote a high standard of consumption that is representative of ascending social groups that are searching new lifestyles. The answer here too might be yes, but we have to give a lot of nuances. Also, more lower middle class people or smaller apartment or students. So it's not the broad picture like that, just ascending social groups. You have to divide them in specific groups, which are developers are targeting also specific typologies of residential high-rises to specific typologies of people, students in Melbourne, smaller apartments now in the central part of Sao Paulo, and so on and so on. Or lower middle class in some parts of periphery of Lyon. Creation of new spatialities, well, the last two, the creation of new spatialities, enclaves of interface, the possibilities, new ways of inhabiting or living the city with the participation of residents. We do not have, when I say we do not have answers yet, we do not have definitive answers yet, because we were not able just to do all the field work we intended to do, as Manuel was saying yesterday. So we have partial questions. So when we look at the hypothesis, we can understand partly to some, and we never have a very straightforward answer. It's always with a lot of nuances. And as a provisional conclusion, because I'm already talking a lot, what about our geographical hypothesis, which was high-rise living occurs in central and gentrifying places mostly? Well, really, reality is far more complex. The rich geographies, we might speak about the rich geographies of living high. First, we discovered that in France, as I just said, upper middle class central high-rise living already existed since the 1970s, although on a small scale. And this is what was studied, and it's a new thing. The rise also of high rises, of residential high rises in suburbs, in Melbourne, in Dallas, integration and mostly later addition of residential high rises in new urbanism developments, which were unheard of before the study. And also the importance of the relations between the vertical and the horizontal. At the geographical scale, the relationship between horizontal and vertical is something which we didn't think so much at the beginning, but now we are beginning to see that it's one of the important points of the study. We are currently waiting a paper on that in São Paulo. Presentation of Asma Rescalek yesterday in Oran was also about that, and which show the fragmentation of the landscape and the conflicts which might arise between horizontal and vertical dwellers, between older vertical, new higher vertical ones. So there is also a question of temporality, which is very important. And well, I will just stop here and stop my presentation. And thank you. And now I will just give the floor to Manuel Appert. So if, yeah, you can put me backstage for the moment. So Manuel, floor is yours. Please, your mic.
I say just thank you, Christian, for this introduction, and not only an introduction, but also a very good synthesis of the work we've done and the hypothesis we have developed from both sides of the Atlantic, from Brazil to Europe. And I think this is it could be a good starting point for a final work that will assemble all of our production from Brazil and Europe. So I'm starting to share my screen. I hope you can hear me and see my screen. Is that right? Yes. Okay. So I'm starting. I can't see anymore the chat room. So if you need to stop me, just text me, or I don't know. So now I will talk about the case of London. And sorry, I have to go back to the beginning of my presentation. I'm just talking about London. In two parts. I have two different presentations, one for today, and there is another one planned on the 8th of April. I think it's on Thursday, I think. And for the first part of my intervention for now, for the time being, I will talk about how we chosen London in the project, and also reflect on the insights given to London and the work that have been done and have been fruitful for the project. So the main highlights. And then I will talk about the next mission, or the new pioneering front of my research, and I hope it could be discussed. Its perspective on suburban verticalization. Christian was just mentioning, was questioning the fact that high-rise living was developing mainly in the core areas of the metropolises we are studying, to a few exceptions, and some new developments that are starting to developed in the vicinity of these centres and around in the peripheries of these centres. The work of Louise on suburban Melbourne was one of the example, and one of the research I'm starting now is trying to evaluate and assess the verticalization of the suburbs of the southeast of England, so a radius around London of commuter towns that are now seeing a lot of new high-rise projects. So I will try to find out is the hypothesis that that I will develop today, and I will show you today, could be the hypothesis for the suburban areas as well. So why have we chosen London in the high-rise project? So Franco-Brazilian project, and London has nothing to do with that in theory, but actually it's just because I'm working on my field work is London from the beginning of my research career. I started my PhD thesis on transport and densification in London. So the thesis was back in 2005. So it's a long time of research, and this is a city we have gained an in-depth knowledge now. And it's also a global city, and this is a city that has developed a liberal agenda in terms of planning guidelines, in terms of planning regime. And these planning regime guidelines and the opening up of the economy and the deregulation of the economy and the financialization of the real market were first seen in the Anglo-Saxon world, especially in London and New York, and from London it goes through to Europe and the rest of the world as well. So we've chosen to have London as a sort of reference case, not a city, not a case to start comparison with, but a reference case in terms of planning, how planning is done in this city and how verticalization processes are developing with which actors and their negotiations, their interaction, etc. So the main focus was much more the processes that were developing in London as a sort of reference for the project. And I was talking about the almost 15 years of research, or even more, 17 years of research on London, and it went from I was saying about density and transportation, but then also I started to work on the high-rise question because of the impact, the landscape impacts of tall buildings in the skyline of London, and how the conflicts that arise at the beginning of the 2000, when a new mayor was elected and high-rise were built. So I went from high-rise and landscape impacts to contextual analysis of the location patterns of high-rises, that's mainly in the high-rise project, and to the politics of high-rise production in the case of London. So I will show you now a selection of highlights of this research. I will focus on the research done in the case of high-rise, of the high-rise project. I will not go back to the question of landscape impacts or something else, but on the question of contextual analysis of location patterns and the politics of high-rise. So these three pictures, I've chosen these three pictures to show you the history and all the time lapse between the last period of high-rise buildings. The starting point is Ronan Point to the left, which is a high-rise that has that was partly destroyed by fire in 1968. So a prefabricated modernist building in the eastern suburbs of London, in a poor area of London, not the wealthiest western part of London. A tower that was built to house urgently people from immigration background, and also to rehouse people living in slums in the eastern part of the city. And this tower epitomized, as well as the modernist period, the first real wave of verticalization in London, but also in a lot of European cities at that time. A first wave that was marked by the construction of housing, public housing, and also prestigious office buildings in areas such as La Défense in Paris or the City of London. So two ways of verticalizing through public housing and also through offices. This tower epitomized this period. It also epitomized the end, the start of the demise of the high-rise in London and also in Europe. And by the 1970s, there were several problems, construction problems with these kind of high-rises, such as Ronan Point. There were also problems with the economic crisis starting in 1974. People that were housed in these buildings were the people that were also fired and get unemployed in this period. And these estates started to deteriorate as a place to live in terms of a concentration of low-income families and a lack of public investments to maintain these buildings. So by the end of the 1970s, the representation, the vision of the high-rise, the modernist residential high-rise, completely changed. It was a kind of U-turn. At the end of the 1960s, it was the promise of a new world, the promise of modernity, of high-quality living, amenities, electricity. You have the toilets, the bathroom inside the apartment and not outside the apartment. So it was the ultimate modernity. By the end of the 1970s, it became the emblem or the icon for the urban decay, the urban crisis, and so the image of these areas and these kind of architectures completely changed, a complete U-turn in this period. And until during the 1980s and 90s, almost nothing happened. Not a lot of towers were built. Above all residential, almost nothing was built in Europe except in Spain. And in London, nothing was built, maybe one or two high-rise or 20 stories. And the high-rise continued to be built, but it was mainly offices. But the residential high-rise living was completely dead at that time. And then at the end of the 1990s, a new period started to emerge with some changing geopolitics in the UK, with the election of a new mayor, the creation of a new municipality that was abolished by the Conservative Party in 1986, Margaret Thatcher. So the recreation of a municipality, and a left-wing municipality, and the consecration of the work of Richard Rogers, the architect that also is urbanist. His work was highly recognized by the circles of power at that time, and he was very influential. And at that time, he published, I think, Cities for a Small Planet or something like that in 1999, and it was the main advocate for urban intensification or densification. And this is at that time that the Swiss Ray Tower, so this tower in the middle of my slide, designed by Norman Foster, was proposed in 1998 and was completed in 2003, and it created a precedent because this architecture was absolutely stunning, a rupture, a bifurcation, or a big radical change in the way of building office building in the city, with all the ecological credential that was given to this tower, and also a big name of architects, and also a very weird shape that was very recognizable from afar and also from up close from the street level. This tower created a precedent because soon after, two other very famous and very iconic towers went ahead as well and were constructed. The Shard, which is a pyramidal tower near London Bridge Station, and also the Heron Tower, which is another high-rise designed by KPF in the City of London. And the floodgates opened at that time. And by the beginning of the year 2010, more than 100 towers were proposed or under construction in London. And by 2020, so last year, there were 550 projects in London and 200 high-rises under construction in 2020. So this is an acceleration of the high-rise movement. Obviously, it's not. There are not 200 towers, office towers being built in London. London can accommodate 3 to 4 or even 5 towers per year at the maximum, because the office market is not that big, and nobody, I think, even New York cannot cope with more than 3 or 4 high-rise office buildings because it's consumed a lot of office space. So. Something like 75 or 80% of the high-rises that are projected or under construction are residential. So there is, again, a new U-turn around the year 2000 for the construction of high-rises. Here's a map showing you the spatial dynamics between 1960 and 2020 of high-rise buildings. This is the map for the towers built before 2000, with the coloring referencing mixed building in black, hotel in green, residential in blue, and office building in red. On this map, you can see how offices were highly concentrated in the core of the metropolis, the central area, the City and Westminster, but also Canary Wharf in the Docklands. So this is the part of the Dock of London's to the east of the city, the docks of London that were transformed starting in the 1980s. And also some suburban centres like Croydon to the south. And look at the residential tower in blue. The residential tower, we observe not a concentrated pattern, but a much more dispersed pattern of location. You have a residential tower all around London, especially in clusters. You see clusters of 3 here, 3 there, 3 there, or here another cluster, or here clusters. And these clusters correspond to the housing estates and the public housing estates built in the outer suburbs and also in the inner suburbs of the city. This is the picture in 2000, and the geography between 2000 and 2014. You see the geography changing dramatically. And again, the period after 2014, that's 2015 to now. So we have a process of concentration of high-rises, which is quite significant. And this process of concentration was something that has to be interrogated. Why are we changing the pattern of location? Why are we seeing these new clusters or this new specific site that cater for high-rise building? We can. What is also significant is that there is a continuing trend for verticalization in the city and Canary Wharf. So in the city, mainly with office building. So it is a very, very office-focused area. Whereas in Canary Wharf, you can see that in the previous period, there were mainly office building being constructed, and now still office building, but mainly around residential building. So a sort of mixing of functions in this area. So that was to be interrogated. One of the first findings of the research was that the concentration of high-rise building in London, residential high-rise building, was mainly due to the fact that high-rise building was associated with transport accessibility, and public transport accessibility above all, and not road accessibility. Access to public transport was important, and also land for redevelopment was necessary to build these high rises. And there is another part of the answer that lie on the question of opportunity areas. That a new tool developed by the municipality of London at the beginning of the year 2000. Opportunity areas are areas designated for urban for public investment, land assembly, land remediation, which is decontamination of the land. And these areas are supposed to receive new public transport investments, and they are in need of regeneration. So I will not discuss the need for regeneration, which is a very neoliberal kind of approach to planning, but the municipality of London decided that some areas very close to the center or very highly accessible to the center, with good train or underground or light rail transit access, these areas very close to the center but experience a very low level of development and a very bad image, and also we consider these places are underused in terms of land use. And these places are mainly industrial areas or logistics areas, or old railway yards and railway maintenance tracks and depots, or else. All these activities that are necessary for the economy of the city, but these activities are also consuming a lot of space for an output in terms of profitability that is not as high as, say, financial services, for instance. So these areas were specifically spotted for their potential of accessibility and for their big land availability. So that's why you see this geography of verticalization, which is much more associated with these places of focus for investment and transformation. These main areas, and the example for this kind of approach was, of course, Canary Wharf, which is all the area surrounding the Docklands, which experienced since the beginning of the year 2000 the 1980s status of free entrepreneurship and free development, a free zone for free commercial zone. And on this model, they try to develop other places. So there is Stratford, which is a place that received the Olympic Games in 2012. Also Vauxhall to the southwest, which is undergoing rapid transformation at the moment, but also public estates like here, Elephant and Castle, or the centre of Croydon, which is a 1960s administrative centre with a lot of old building dating from the 1960s and 70s. Looking at the map, another way to interrogate the location of high-rise where they are built, so we can associate them with the planning policies such as opportunities areas, but we also try and have a look at how this high-rises fare against a sort of social spatial contextualized analysis of London. And here on these pictures you have the location of high-rises, the tower built after 2000, the one built and under construction. So you see there is a sort of linear kind of location pattern along the Thames because of the views of the river, etc. And we have also a sort of half crown or a quarter crown to the northeast of the central core of the metropolis, and also the valley that goes from the Thames to Stratford. And if you look at the, if you look at the location and the big proportion of high-rise, you have here the classification of areas according to wealth, to income, and also to changing house prices. There are several criteria assembled to make, and also the question of density, areas with low density and medium to high density, people with low level of revenue and high level of revenue. And you see that there is two specific categories of areas that are receiving the vast majority of high-rises, of residential high-rises. This is areas of developer-led gentrification, so places that have a relatively average or medium density and have not a high level of income. They are not high. They are not areas of low level of income of poor people, but they are not also people from the richest boroughs or areas of the city. And in green, this is I've named them area of developer-led gentrification because it was the place where you have the most developments going on, and the places where the land prices and also house prices were increasing the fastest against the average for the metropolis. So all this area in green are these areas that are identified by developers. Other contextual analysis is the impact of public transport accessibility, and you see a good correlation between the accessibility and the location of high-rise projects and towers that were already built and also projects. To summarize all this, I'm going because I'm talking already too much. To summarize all of this, I propose a theoretical analysis of all of this, sort of assembling the different dynamics in terms of research, and also here a small and perhaps more funny kind of categorization of these high-rises. So I try to do a typology of residential high-rises according to the context. So I've not defined these buildings, like this one, you see the strata tower with the wind turbines at the top. I'm not trying to define them or to categorize their architecture, but I'm trying to categorize their contextualization in terms of location and the area they are sitting in. So the first category is the beacon of regeneration. So the tower that is used by developers or also local authorities to create value and to correct market in soon to be redeveloped areas. So places like this one on the slide, where the land value and the house prices are quite low, and these high rises tend to arrive and change the average price of transactions, and they set new standards for the area. So the beacon of regeneration. Then the luxury Belvedere, which is on the next image, which is the Beetham Tower, the one Southwark Bridge Tower, just on the opposite side of the Thames of the City of London. A tower designed by Ian Simpson, and you see the prices on the right for flats at the top at £18 million. That's 25 million euros. So the luxury Belvedere, the crash pad tower, so mid-range small unit high-rises that are built close to the business centers. Several high-rises have been built around the city and around Canary Wharf, where you have office towers. And in these buildings, you find high-rises with very small apartments for Airbnb or for expats or for people that live in the countryside but stay just for the week in the center of town. And the final category is the PRS tower. So it's the tower that are it's for renting for specific people. This is developments that are proposed by developers for students or other niche developments such as retiring people or student housing here on the right, and another PRS tower from Bouygues Immobilier in East London. So my final word would be on the theorization, or shall I continue, or do you want me to stop now? I can continue on the 8th, because I will probably have more time on the 8th. What do you want? What do you prefer? Manuel and Christian, do you want me to stop now so that I don't delay too much the rest of the session, and I can continue on the last slides on the 8th of April? Please tell me.
Well, okay. If you prefer to, I mean, but if you want to round up some conclusions, or if you want to leave them for the next section, whatever.
I think it's better for me to conclude and introduce with the same thing on the 8th, because I will have to go in depth in the theory now. So I think it's not the time. I will have to hurry, and I will delay everybody.
Okay. Okay.
So to be continued on the 8th.
In the next session.
Okay, this was very good teasing for the people who are hearing us. So thank you very much, Manuel. And now, well, it's a good transition because Manuel is already on stage. So he will take the floor and go on the other side of the Atlantic to São Paulo to begin.
Okay. Thank you, Christian. And here we go. I believe, just tell me, because I will lose I will not see the chat anymore. I believe I'll be sharing the screen.
I will tell you.
But please let me know what's. Do you see my screen? Can you just let me know? I don't see the chat. I mean, Eileen or Paulo, please tell me if you see my screen or not. Don't write in the chat. Just let me know, please.
No, we cannot see.
Can you see my screen?
No, we only see you. She's already.
Let me try again. Share the screen. Share the screen. Let me try again. This one. And now? Do you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So, great. We will be, myself and Camila, will be presenting specific about São Paulo, not as broad as Manuel and Christian had presented, but describing and going to the specifics of the set of procedures. As I said yesterday, I don't feel comfortable calling it a methodology that we develop for promoting, for allowing a more rigorous and with more criteria process of reading the urban territory. And that for two reasons. Christian already mentioned today that one of the issues, one of the scales of the project was to develop spatial temporal assessments in Lyon, in São Paulo, basically, but also in other cities. And also, as we mentioned yesterday, because of that, we designed the framework of the project to consider 5 different scales. Scales where we could also take into account social and economical indexes, just as Manuel just presented for London. So we went from the continental scale and the regional, that we call it regional, but let's call it the countries, using a database, using employees. And then we moved to the 3 other scales of the project, the local ones, if you can call it local in the sense of a specific city, and that's what this communication, this talk is about. What did we design to read the urban territory of São Paulo and why? In local terms, in terms of the city and the metropolitan area, but also in the intra-urban scale, and getting to the, let's say, one object of study, one building, and why that building particularly, instead of defining it previously. As I said yesterday, to do that, considering the possibility of developing a set of procedures that could also be used in another city, we realized that a common index would be needed, and then we decided to use the Human Development Index. To do that, it was necessary also to have in mind the differences between of these indexes are managed in each country. And that's just a table that presents these differentiations in France and in Brazil. At that time, we were considering using this methodology for both cities, as I said yesterday. Why is that so? Because, for instance, it is a picture of Julio's Pedrassoli work, a previous one, about São Paulo, that you can see, and you have the skylines from 1985 to 2011. And you can basically see that the mass of high-rise buildings that are in the city. What you have here in the blue line, it is the limit of the city itself. And this is what we can call the metropolitan area of São Paulo. We knew that. We knew this is our reality. This huge mass of high rises. So, how to pick one to choose? How not to be totally arbitrary on the selection of specific case studies, and having in mind case study is not only the final object of study, but also the area, an area of transformation. How to work, how to move, how to go on, independently of the knowledge that the Brazilian researchers have about São Paulo. If we want to design a set of procedures that could be adjusted to other cities, how to move on? That was our fundamental question at the beginning of the project. Even when we wrote it, because we didn't want to be arbitrary. Of course, any one of us could, oh, I want to study this building because I know the area where it is. This is an area of transformation. I know it's important. I know it has been significantly changed, independently if the gentrification process or not. But once we didn't want to design something just for São Paulo, how to move on. And as I said yesterday, it was not a matter of comparing São Paulo and Lyon. That was never a goal of the project, because they are not comparable. I was even asked for by other researchers not involved in the project many times. Why Lyon? Why Lyon and São Paulo? If it's São Paulo, then why not Paris? Well, and then every time explaining that one of the basic premises of the project, one of the goals, well, we are not going to compare, but we want to understand tendencies of the transformations in different cities. We want to better understand tendencies of vertical living, possible changes in social practices, social urban practices. As you can see, there is no comparison. In São Paulo, it's a kind of a mass of buildings. Even in that mass, we could have chosen iconic buildings, for instance. But as I said before, we decided not to. So what you see in the right is something that to be understood in the end of this talk. But what's important to point out here is that these set of procedures should encompass or should develop, should establish a social spatial pattern of analysis. It was not only a quantitative issue of counting the number of residential high-rises in São Paulo and defining, oh, in this area we have more, in that area we don't have that many, and so on. That for us was not enough. We want to build, we want to design this process. It was hard. It was really, really hard. It took us a lot of time, more than we expected, also because of the challenges that we will, as this process was developed and designed, new challenges every time were coming up, appearing. We had two major questions. You saw it yesterday also, one, and Christian also made a reference to it, and why we got stuck, and we did it only for São Paulo. One of the things was the database availability, what data we have access to, and you understand it why. And the other thing was the political subdivision of the territory. In Lyon, you have 1.5 million inhabitants, let's say, and the political subdivisions of 15 communities and about 132 towers. In São Paulo, in the city, we have 12 million people. It represents 20% of the gross national product and about 6% of the Brazilian population. The political division of the territory, okay, we have neighborhoods, we have census data, but the municipal one, it's what we call UDH, it's a human development unit of human development. Basically, it considers that we don't have more than 400 houses or more than 6,000 people. In São Paulo, what you see, and all the, in fact, the yellow or the yellowish spots are circles of buildings. From 1985 to 2019, we had more than 313,000 residential high-rises built in the city. Can we talk, when we look at this picture, can we talk about the process of concentration? This vertical urbanism, this verticalization process is one that is concentrated in one area of the city, or is it dispersed all around the city? Of course, not all around the city, but it's not only. Can we talk about concentration? We talk about it. We talk about dispersion. Of course, we can reduce it to a smaller area of analysis and say, okay, we have a higher concentration here than in there. And that's what we ended up doing in the construction of the process, how to read the territory, and you understand it. But that's a question. In general, can we say that, okay, this is a concentrated process of vertical urbanism? I don't think so. And it's something that I also showed to you yesterday, related to the difficulties that we had in terms of reading the territory, why it will not be possible to establish any real and precise analysis, because the organization of the territory was so different that we needed a different process. Again, not to compare, but to understand it in, let's say, similar areas of analysis, or equivalent, not similar, equivalent areas of analysis. And you see that we ended up doing that. Not in the beginning, we start the other way. But this is a chart that presents the differences between these three cities in terms of the, if I want, territorial unit of analysis and the geographical scales that we have available, basically, and the decisions that were made. So, also because we wanted to study, we want to analyze not only one high-rise, one residential high-rise, but also the surrounding area, its immediate environment. This will be shown, shown to you in other sessions, not today, even part of it this afternoon with Camila in the panel 2, and also in panel 4. But that was particularly important to us, and that was one of the tasks of the project, how to look at and what kind of, what we see in terms of social urban practices, social spatial urban practices. Are they changing? Is there anything different? Is there any impact that comes from high rises, residential high rises? So, what you see on the right is an image, not up from the beginning, but I put it here before I start to talk a little bit about the process in itself, where you have the overlays of the high-rise buildings along this period, the yellowish blurred spots, from 1985 to 2019, and that's important to understand. We are talking only about that. We don't analyze, for instance, verticalization process from the 50s or from the 60s or the 70s in São Paulo. No, the starting point of our analysis. The data we had begins in 85. So everything you see is from 1985 to 2019, right? So these are already the residential high-rise geo-referenced and overlaid in the city of São Paulo. And just to show to you that we associated with also with a lot of elements of the urban legislation, not the totality of the urban legislation, some of the instruments, some of the elements that seem to us the most important ones to be analyzed, and that's something as Christian mentioned before, we had some problems in the relationship with the municipality here in São Paulo. Got to a time after the change in the power that just I got a call one January morning after I don't know how many meetings with the municipality and its technicians from the kind of Secretary of State, chef de gabinete, the main secretary of the Secretary of Urban Development in São Paulo, saying that no more, that we were not allowed to talk with them anymore. And they just prohibited any other meeting. So we had a problem in that. We had to step back. What does it mean is that we didn't have full access to data from the municipality and the relationship that we wanted to establish with the municipality didn't work out. We just came back late in October 2019. Then we were able to reestablish it, and it would have been good. But again, the pandemic last year interrupted everything. But anyway, going back specifically to the set of procedures, how do we end up getting here? What do we do in the beginning? How do we start? Well, at the first moment, we start to analyze the metropolitan area, all the data, all the buildings, but also the socioeconomic data that we have. And here what you see is the metropolitan area of São Paulo classified according to 5 bands of HDI, the Human Development Indexes, that we took 3 parameters: the income, the schooling, and expectancy of life, and life expectancy. At that time, we had 5 bands, and we started cross-reference the socioeconomic data with the high-rise buildings by 2 means. One of them, using Quantile with a function of QGIS, equal number of high-rises. That was the first approach that we adopted. And at the same time, and here you see another image, not from the metropolitan area, but from the city of São Paulo, still the same 5 bands, but now with a distribution not considering the equal number of high-rises, but equal intervals of analysis. These were the first 2 approaches that when we started everything. And we did it not only considering the totality of the parameters of the IGA parameters, but the image that you see at the top right, it's only the one related to the income parameter. We did it for both situations, the HDI as a whole, and also the 3 parameters that we were looking at more precisely. As I said, income, life expectancy, and schooling, because we needed to observe it considering an aggregation criteria. you know, independently of what we expected, independently of what, oh, we know that's going to happen. Okay, we can almost be sure, considering the knowledge that I may have about a particular area of São Paulo, but I wanted to show it with the data. At this first stage, at this very first stage, we realized that we didn't need, I mean, it became clear to us that it was better, instead of having the 5 band HDI bands that are normally adopted, because of the particularity of São Paulo, and considering that that could be adjusted to other cities. In other words, not to develop something very rigid, and what we're saying, oh, okay, guys, if you want to do this, it's better if you consider the singularity of the city that you are studying, if you consider the range of municipal human development, and eventually readjust the bands of analysis that you are considering. And that's what we did. We then decided to use not 5 bands of analysis, but 4. And you see them here. They are, wait, the scales, you know, from 0.6 up until 0.1, right? And then, so we restart everything. Getting this kind of, for instance, a summary images that summarize this process. You know, it's easy. We knew that, but now we have the images to prove that where the poorest are normally located, where the wealthy areas are, but when you overlay it with the buildings, if you remember the image before, the yellow image, where basically it is. You know, it's here, there is a concentration, but it's also dispersed, you know, to other areas, not of the city. But that's the summary image that we have. And then what did we do? You have here the same image before, the overlay of all the buildings, the gray high rises dispersed by the city that you see. That happens not only the dark blue is the wealthier area, the higher HDA index, but it's not only here. No, it's distributed, dispersed. It's not distributed. We can say in most of the city. Well, I said before that we are looking to set up, designing a set of procedures that would allow us to select territorial units of analysis, and that would be working with the HDUs, the human development units defined by the municipalities, that are all these that you see in gray, and there are more than 1,400 about that. What did we do? We selected for each of the 4 bands 10, the 10 with the higher density of high rises. And then you see here the first result. And here the legend. Considering that we had in this period from 85 to 2019, more than 300,000, well, again 300, no, 1,300,000 high-rise, residential high-rise. I'm not talking about the commercial ones. All the numbers that I'm telling you about are only about residential high-rises. Some of them mix it, okay? But we did not count the commercial ones. But we also counted, for instance, in each one of these units of analysis, the average number of floors, the number of housing units, and in order that we could make analysis considering the social and cultural data that we were also analyzing and that we had. Here you have other examples, for instance, for band 1, for band 3, the kind of diagrams and of information that you produce for each one of these 10 HDUs that were selected, 40 in the total at this first stage. And these are examples, the number of towers in the band 1 and the average number of floors that you have in the band 3, for instance. We did it for all, right? But we also did, observed not only the number of towers or the average number of floors, but also the HDI evolution in each one of these bands, considering the national census that we had at that moment, right? 2000 and 2010. So, in summary, we started at this first stage. The perimeter of the municipality, of the city, we selected HDUs, no, UHD, 10 for each area, and here is a zoom. But to do that, as the same way that we observe the evolution of the HDI, we also not only georeferenced all these buildings, and that was a huge problem. I'll get back to it in a few minutes. But also urban legislation elements, for instance, like these, when you have the overlays here of some of them. You have the buildings, you have some of the structural axes, you have issues related to mobility, areas of influence due to the legislation, and all. And here, the selected with the ages at that time, band 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the overlay where they are when we look at it. And that's another thing that we did for each one of these 40. We did all this study about how many high-rise buildings in cycles of in periods of 5 years. This is one example in Vila Andrade and Paraisópolis, and I'll come back to it because in today's presentation, you have to derive, all this area, and you can see, you can observe all the high rises here. And but why that was important to us, and why did we look at it? Where did we ended up having this as one of the 4 areas of study of field work? As I mentioned yesterday, we had planned 3 field works. The first one in January, late January, and then June and September, October. We were able to develop only the first one. So as Christian mentioned before, well, we didn't get to the conclusion that we really want to, because here is Paraisópolis, the second community, the second slum in São Paulo, right? But also, and it is another, not only a matter of demographic density, that what this photography shows, but also income, infrastructure, the sadness, the inflation, the capacity of infrastructure, mobility and accessibility that also relate to that, and what's important for us, public areas and equipment. What you see here is again the image that we produced in the beginning of the process of developing the process, and this one is something. This one is one of the latest ones when you have all the overlays of analysis, but the colored circles, here is Paraisópolis, this is this, right? Are the buildings that were built, the residential high rises that were built in the period of 1985 to 2019 in the area. That encompasses 3 HDI bands, 1, 3, and 4. One is open. The other thing was, okay, let's do all that. We have and this is another area that shows some this verticalization. What happened from 2005 to the left, the image to the left, in 10 years? The number here, this was used to be, it's a small hill, residential, a middle-class residential area. In 10 years, it was completely transformed because of the urban instruments and in particular urban legislation. It was completely transformed. Why we needed that? Because we wanted to look at it. We needed to look at each one of these 4 areas of possible areas of study, not only in the abstraction of maps, but also with images, right? So it ended up that in a certain moment, we had a new wallpaper in the lab. That's the picture of that moment of the workshops that we developed at that moment with all the printouts, because then we were able to correlate one and other, each one of another of these possible areas of study in each of the 4 bands, having all them in your view and understanding it a little bit better. But that was not that was not the trouble itself. Why we were in trouble at that moment, basically, and these are the reasons why we were basically in trouble. We had 2 key GIS tables for each IGA band to select the 10 HDUs, municipal territorial unit of analysis in each band. One was relative to the higher density of high rises, and the other one, it was a quantitative table with the higher number of high rises. When we did the mosaic, when we started looking at the aerial pictures, we realized that what we had sometimes were very small units of analysis because of the criteria of no more than 400 houses, 400 apartments, and 1,600,000, 1,600 people. The dimensions of analysis were completely different. You could have, for instance, a result informing you that you had a higher density of high rises, let's say, in 1 square meter, 1 kilometer, 1 square kilometer area, or let's say 3 hectares, and the other one with a higher density would be dispersed in an area of 10 hectares. And also, as I mentioned before, and Christian pointed out, the challenge that was posed to us because of the political agenda in the city and the impossibility of keeping the conversation with the municipality. So what we did, and we did everything again, again, these 2 tables, but not only complementary information about urban legislation and also about urban morphology, kernel heat maps each years, number of real estate development of high-rise and of high-rises per year, and more. I will not go in everything because it would take too much time, but this is when I say number of real estate development and of high-rises. That's, for instance, there is a difference basically in São Paulo. You may have a high-rise real estate development that has 5, 8, 12 towers. So it was necessary to distinguish between the number of real estate developments, the red ones, and the number of the real estate, the high towers, the blue ones. Of course, they are not the same. So you see here, you have, in this period, 211 real estate developments. How many towers? And that was a huge problem to solve. We had problems in the georeferencing because of the way the data was organized, and we had to hire some people from the Institute of Mathematics to develop some software specific to clean the table, because it was being duplicated. The number of high-rise towers were being duplicated, and because of the way it was organized, and other things that we were doing at that time, and then we gave up. And they didn't convince us that we should carry them on. For instance, cross-referencing with Airbnb, and this an image of Lyon, and then we saw that the correlation between the hot spots and the cold spots were, well, not really interesting. To make a long story a short one, how did we go? I said to you that we started selecting 10 of these HDUs, or let's say the territorial units of analysis in each band. And we had a problem that we wanted to have equivalent areas of analysis. So with all the data, with all these parameters of observation, we decided, we overlaid, we superimposed a statistical grid of 400 for 400 on all the area. When we did that, we did everything again, all the calculations. Now, not only for the territorial unit of analysis, let's say category 1, the municipal ones, but to the squares, to the 400 by 400. No? When we did it, we associated with what we called a verticalization index that observes, among other parameters, the number of high rises, the median number of floors, the median number of housing units per high rise, and also qualitative information related to the real estate development, in terms of privatization of the urban space, relation to the street, qualitative information, and also analytical cartographies and heat maps and verticalization peaks, as we mentioned before. This is a zoom of the same image, but what's important here is that what it showed to us is that we were able to establish a correlation between an analytical percentage of the selected polygons and the verticalization index, as well as the average distribution of housing units in each of the 4 HDIs bands and its spatial distribution, not only in terms of the temporality and the spatial temporal assessment, but also corroborating a particularity of São Paulo, that it's heterogeneous territory. São Paulo is a territorial heterogeneity that mostly shows to us a social spatial segregation. We were able to build these correlations. Again, this is related to São Paulo and some other images. Then you have details again in the squares and the urban instruments. And we produced these images or these cartographies of analysis as we needed, right? And then here we have heat maps, the territorial units of analysis, the squares, the superimposition of the statistical grid, and another. For each one of these, you have the intensity, number of high-rise buildings, for instance, the biggest, the brownish ones from 31 to 40 towers in a 400 by 400 area, and here is the HDI. This is an example of one of these areas. Another one, going back to Paraisópolis, and just another image of this, the work that was developed, and now I'll stop here, and Camila will take on and explain to you guys the development of it in terms of the summary sheet that we adopt and so on. And okay, that's it. I'll be back later. I have to stop sharing, right?
Yes. So
now it's Camila, and then I'll come back.
It will be Camila now. Camila Camargo Moreno. Okay.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Let's. I share my screen with you. 1 minute. Okay.
Oh, it's me. I think Camila just disappeared. So we will wait for her coming back. I don't know if she has problems with a slideshow. Well.
Okay. Let's try again. Okay. Let me check a little thing first. One minute, please. Well, you see my notes in the slides. I put my notes in the slides. I try think before. One minute, please. Okay. Well, I continued to present some analytical procedures that we developed from the point where Manuel stopped. So, as part of an analysis process structured by systematic approximations, we produce summary sheets like this. These sheets were developed and reviewed at different times of the research and bring together polygons, informations related to the selection criteria that we have adopted for closer analysis. The summary sheet contains a map with the location of the polygon and information about its human development index. As an important criterion of selection, we observe the presence of territorial units of human development units, or UHD, with different local human development index bands in the polygon. In this case, that we take as an example, part of the polygon is in UHD band 2, it's a red color here, and part is in band 4, the yellow color.
We do not see the sheets. We only see the first image of the presentation with the title. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, no problem. Let me see. I'm trying another thing because I need to support the text. Okay, I will try. I'm not put into presentation mode. I talk this. So I come back later a little. I show you the summary sheet. These sheets were developed and reviewed at different times of the research and bring together polygons, information related to selection criteria that we have adopted for closer analysis. The summary sheet contains a map with the location of the polygon and information about its human development index. As an important criterion of selection, we observe the presence of human development units, or HDU, of different local human development index bands in the polygon. In this case, that we take as an example, part of the polygon is in human development unit, band 2 is the red color, and other part is in band 4, the yellow color, with a small piece in band 3. The infographic shows the composition of the index for the 2 principal HDU, which lists the population income, longevity, and education, and shows its evolution between the census of the years 2000, and 2010. The sheet also shows the spatial distribution of high-rise enterprises according to their year of launch. Its concentration or dispersion was also an important selection criterion. The red pins that we see in this cartography express the most recent enterprises launched between 2015 and 2018. The graphics complement the information comparing the number of projects and towers delivered per period in the polygon under analysis, with all the polygons highlighted in the same region. In this stack, I mark the polygon. There's an example. Now, if I use, I'm sorry. The graphics in this example, we see that the polygon underwent a more intense verticalization process in the early 2000 year. And the next slide. The average of floors and residential units we are also noted, through which we can see that the polygon under analysis stands out. We also included in the summarized form parameters of urban legislation, such as zoning and the presence of strategic urban planning instruments. We observed too some aspects of demographic density and the presence of urban mobility infrastructure in the polygon, the presence of the public buildings and green areas, as well as places or buildings attractors of social practices. Finally, the historic series points to the recent transformation in the urban structure. We can see the big structure mobility here, and the high-rise residential in this polygonal and its surroundings. It is worth mentioning that all these criteria were taken into account in final selection stage, but some of them have gained more relevance. The adoption of summary sheets throughout this process provide to be an important graphic and analytical strategy, since it brings into contact the wide range of information and questions built in previous stages of the research. It also supported the review of the procedures and instruments of the field research. Otherwise, we were decided to arbitrarily select a project for a case study in the central area of São Paulo, considering the significant and recent elements of the process of verticalization in this region. At the same time, we carry out different stages of exploratory field research as a way of adjusting the methodological selection procedures and the questions that are linked to interurban scale of analysis. Thus, we developed the characterization of social spatial urban dynamics and hypotheses about lifestyles reconfigured by the verticalization process. And I talk about this, about field research today afternoon. The field research was effectively carried out in January 2020 in the 4 selection projects or enterprises included in the select analysis polygons. It incorporated the review of the methodology and procedures and instruments of research. As a result of much more intense and productive work, we have a larger amount of post-field material, which has been subsiding the elaboration of some analysis products that will be presented in the next sessions. Of this process, some dimensions of analysis were built collectively, which also cross the scales of analysis of the Highrise project. They express at the same time singular adjustment and more generalized patterns of the production process of the contemporary city. Thus, the vertical city could be read by the conjunction of the dimension C, which points to physical limits that include the social spatial practices mediated in different degrees. By the living dimension 2, which attracts a set of perceptions and process about the contemporary city, bringing to the same field of decisions the modes of production of urban space and the constitution of a determined heterogeneous of complex structure. Finally, the verticalization process, where different temporalities and new limits imbricated to the production process of the contemporary city are combined. I stop here. My presentation is very short. Manuel will continue and present some final observations. I'm sorry for my English, is not so good, but Manuel continues, please. Yes, Manuel. Manuel is continuous.
Okay, thank you. Camila, you have to stop sharing the screen, please. Just, okay. Just to finish, to round up, I will do it again. Just a couple of minutes more. We should be. Do you see my image, please?
Yes, we can see. Okay.
Come on, it's not here. We go where I want because I'm sorry. Here. Well, just to round up, I mean, we did some other early attempts that we did not consider. In fact, we did not carry on. This one is something that Milena and Maíra mentioned yesterday about parklets and so on, but not parklets, food trucks. Parklets were one of the observations that, one of the things that we considered, because, as I said before, we were concerned about observing the relationship between residential high-rises and supposedly the so-called new lifestyles and, for instance, new social, spatial, urban practices, and to what extent parklets became an issue is because there are, similarly to another public policy that we have in São Paulo, the adoption of public areas, of public green areas, most of them became to be adopted and parklets became to be built. Parklets not only close to restaurants and bars, as Maíra and Milena mentioned yesterday, but also with some relation to high-rise. Not that much as the adoption of public areas, public squares. Here you see the distribution in the city of São Paulo, and here you see the relations. You see the dots are areas possible. But what's important is that all this work, what it allowed was the development. It made possible some offsprings. For instance, this one, the relations between high rises, georeferences with the adoptions of public areas and to analyze the public policy and see to what extent it was also being an element of promotion of privatization of the urban space or not. And therefore, allowing the possibility of identifying processes of management and branchification of public spaces associated to high rises, as well as identifying possible correlations between new housing typologies, new lifestyles, and temporary urban intervention, and therefore social spatial urban practices. This is another example of what we studied. I mean, the detail similar to the one that Camila was showing. You have the 400 by 400, the square, and then the purple ones are the adopted public areas, and the yellow ones are the high rises, right? And as well as all this work also allowed a completely different offspring developed by Cesar Simoni and Luana Carvalho, that what you see here is the correlation between the singularity of the finalization process in São Paulo, but mainly when you have the peak of the verticalization in São Paulo between 2017 2018, and what here you have, what's inside the Minha Casa Minha Vida, my home, my life, the most important social housing public program developed in Brazil, and you see the correlation between the peak of the high rises in this particular moment, residential high rises here, with the social housing. And that's something that we didn't expect when really didn't. But the correlation is very strong. As well, these other images where they are not readable, they are not legible. What they show is, you see the ears, and in blue, you have not high-rise buildings, and the red ones are the high-rises. And the evolution and the concentration here, and all this. Again, related to the financialization process, as well as what, maybe this is the most important achievement or offspring or something still to be worked out in the project, what Julio Pedrassoli showed yesterday afternoon. When not, because it's not a matter of using remote sensing techniques, but how to use these techniques, these two, really to develop a complex process of reading an urban territory. And what Julio showed to us, and that yesterday, there is a correlation between what we developed and also because it's complementary, and this is part of the high-rise. This is the growth rate of high-rises building, and the red squares are three areas of the city of São Paulo. But as he showed yesterday, the correlation with the purchasing power parity. That's not the increase of the income, it's the increase of the purchasing power. That's quite different, And you see here that analysis was developed on the top, overlaid to all we did before. And that's what I showed to you in the first part, ending up with this synthesis, a summary of the image. Here it is, and he showed it to you yesterday. My final slide, and just to going back to some of the observations that Christian made before. While some remarks, some findings, let's say, and some attempts. Well, we were able, of course, it's not finished, and you never, I have doubts if somebody will be able to finish completely because the rate of transformation and so on, so many things. But we were really able, I really believe that, to develop some analysis in terms of social demographic dynamics. We are also able to address issues of inclusiveness and urban equity, as I said yesterday. We moved from, it's not definite, but we moved from inclusiveness to urban equity. And Carlos Tapia will readdress and develop this issue in his conference the day before tomorrow, or after tomorrow, sorry, on Thursday morning, as well as it was possible to identify vertical segregations. As Christian mentioned, we tried to, maybe we didn't get to a conclusion about a de-westernized gaze, and it will be addressed by Julio Arroyo in the case of Buenos Aires next Tuesday morning. But we really did some advancements in that, right? As Christian mentioned, it's not a matter of getting rid of the concepts, but trying to develop another look. Definitely, vertical living is a social construction. Even though the case studies could not be finished due to the pandemic everywhere, and we were very, very much penalized for that. As Camila said, we had two other fields works that we were not able to develop, but some similarities and singularities of the logic of the production, or of the reproduction of the logic of the production can be identified, mostly in terms of a financialized neoliberal city, and there are differences in the financialization processes, of course, but also high rises as a commodity. although we do not have a convergence in the case studies for the reasons that we're explaining, some questions may be posed. Might new sociabilities review the substitution of class division and social division by lifestyle divisions? Is that really true? Can we really talk about the learning process of a new, quote-unquote, work-play lifestyle? And finally, are we witnessing new forms of high gentrification, of all enclosed building signs of a growing exclusion in the so-called neoliberal entrepreneurial city? And that's something that we'll get back to it in our final roundtable. Thank you very much.
Hello. So thank you, everybody, on that panel. So if I want just not to sum up what has been done, because what has been said is already a summary. So to sum up a summary would be very arid, I think. But you might have seen what the project was about and what it was not about. It was not about a comparison, indeed, but about specific case studies. But some of them might serve as references, like London. Some others were used as setting some trends and different trends, and also sets of procedures that were developed by such and such example, like in São Paulo, which might be used elsewhere. And you also were able to see that the huge amount of preliminary work that had been to be done before even beginning the real case studies, because we wanted to have a selection process which was really very robust, and especially in São Paulo, especially in cases where you have a huge amount of residential high-rises, which was absolutely not the same in the cases in which you didn't have a lot of residential high-rises, because you already knew almost all of them, because there were so few. So that's a difference, and it's interesting that the sets of procedures used in São Paulo might be also used in cities which have a lot of case studies. And also, you have seen that in the project, databases have been developed, HDI, heat maps, and other that might be used by other researchers who are researching on São Paulo, or who want to make comparisons or references, use it as a reference for other case studies, and also for researches on other subjects. And as Manuel already said, even in our own research, there were things that were already offsprings of the research, because there were just things that were found when searching for other things, such as, for instance, research on public spaces, which are becoming quite an important part of the study, especially in São Paulo. And also, we have seen the paramount importance of temporalities, because the analysis are the stronger the long-term analysis, the stronger the analysis. I think that really this is one point when you can go through time to see the trend, the shifts, the crisis. It's also a beginning, not an explanation per se, indeed, but you have a more in-depth knowledge of the cases, the contemporary cases you are studying, and also when looking at not only the databases but also the narratives, the stakeholders, which might be differing or might be the same during all the time. So this, I think, is really interesting. And Manuel, do you want to add something? Or no? You are not obliged, not Emilio, Camila, or Manuel.
He's enjoying his cigar and his pipe, his electronic one. He doesn't want to talk.
Yeah.
I talked too much already. Sorry for the time it took me.
No, there are about 10 minutes left to the end of the session. So I think that the people who are on YouTube, well, I'm expecting we have people on YouTube.
Yes, I had a question when you presented. I think that was Manuel, when you came back talking at the end. Have you tried to make an hypothesis of the relationships or the correlation between Miyakasami Vida peak of construction and the peak of high rises?
Oh, this is the core of the study of Juana and Cesar. And so we do not want to tell everything today, because it would spill all the beans.
Sorry,
and,
that was the wrong question.
It was just a teaser, just to say, oh, why is that correlation? Is it just a correlation, or is it really something true underneath? And there is something, a big secret that will be unveiled by Juana and Cesar.
It reminds me of the increasing volume of affordable housing built in London since the year 2010, correlated to the construction of high rises, because developers have to provide a certain amount, a quota of affordable housing, or they provide a financial contribution for municipalities to build social housing around the building. So the amount of money, of real estate money circulating, is also indirectly constructing some affordable housing, no social housing.
Well, it's far worse in São Paulo. You will see, and you will cry. No.
Teaser.
Yeah. Manuel.
Christian, Manuel is in the same panel. He'll see it.
Yeah. He will see for himself. Yes.
Yes.
No, there was just a comment by Carlos Tapia on Manuel's presentation, saying that some coincidences with his own lecture, so it will be perfect to extend your conclusion. So that will be, it's another teaser.
Let's see. Carlos is Thursday morning. Carlos will talk Thursday morning.
Yeah. He will have a conference.
Yes, it's a conference.
Yeah, but then we will also have to, yes, be able to use what you said in the panel. Yeah, afterwards.
Sure, for sure.
Yes, if there is no comment or just question, that means that we were absolutely the clearest people on earth, and that we turned all stones and nothing has been left in the shadow. So we can congratulate ourselves. Or just everybody has already gone to lunch in Brazil, or to have some tea in France. And so we can say goodbye to everybody and see you in about 1 hour and a half for the next session. Okay. So thank you very much.
Bon appétit.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Have a good lunch, everybody.
You too.
Thank you, Senevi,
a pleasure.
at the STI for organizing that. Bye.
Bye.